I I have a sermon title this morning, Running Out of Blue Paint. Now, that does not refer to painting of a house or anything. I will get to that sermon title later in the sermon. So hang in there. I promise I won't forget it. And I know I have at least one person that texted me or wrote me an email prior to today saying he was very interested in that sermon title. So knowing him a bit, I want to keep it till the end to keep him with us in the service. As we consider where we find ourselves as community, as church, as Topsfield, Boxford, North Shore community, but also as a nation. Not talking about the world, but just looking at us here in the USA in our specific area, we are transitioning to a post-pandemic way of being in the world again. And I'm not saying to return to normal life. On purpose, I'm not saying that, because I think we are on a road of discovery to still find out what normal will mean, looking or moving on into the future. We have changed in ways that I think we still have not figured out, that we still do not, or yet do not understand. I think we have changed as society. We have changed as a church community. So I think we'll have to learn and discover this new road and how to go about it. Even as I see on social media, people joyfully posting images of having a meal at your favorite restaurant again, or being with friends again, or venturing out to do something that we used to do before the last year or longer, that this way of being in the world has been with us. There's a lot of advice going around. I mean, if you read the articles, it's just every day. In every reputable publication, you find a lot of stuff to read about it. And then there's the host of less researched and less well-founded and grounded information on the social media, in the social media world as well. So there's not a lack of advice on how to proceed on this road. But I think it will be good for us as Christians to also consider what our sacred text, the collection of narratives that we find in what we call, what that text says about how to live. We have that collection of stories sharing the wisdom of generations of people in their relationship with God. We have that depository of wisdom that we give authority over our lives and say, all right, if we want to determine how to live, we go there to find what is the way that God's people should be in the world. And perhaps this story of Esau and Jacob Cain and Abel is a good story to look at. It's a good story because it's part of the very early history of humankind that we find in our collection of texts. It gives a description, and it's part of a bigger narrative of the creation stories, then this follows, and it's all part of a bigger story of people interacting or coming into the world, learning to engage with the world and living in relationship with God as well. And this bigger story that this one is part of starts with Adam and Eve and the creation stories, those narratives, and then it moves on and it ends with the big flood and the aftermath of the flood. And characteristic of this big story is that there's a lot of violence in it. Violence and escalating violence. Violence getting worse as time goes by, and it's characterized, and the violence is a result of humanity's disobedience, recalcitrance, their almost arrogant behavior in the world and in relationship with God. Now, when we look at this specific narrative of Cain and Abel, there's a lot of questions that one can ask of this narrative. For instance, why did God accept Abel's offering and not Cain's? It has to do with the fact that Cain was a tiller of the land and Abel was a herder, or what is it? If that's the case, then I'm in for trouble because I like tilling the land as well. But I think that's the wrong kind of question to ask of this text. I don't think that is the point and why it was included there. I think we need to ask the right kind of questions and understand, perhaps, or try to understand why this was included. Now, I don't have the wisdom to say exactly this is why the wise Jewish people and later on the church people included this in the text. But I think the focal point is more here the violence committed, the response of Cain to what happened in his life, how he took it, and how he was angry at his brother, and he was also angry at God. And then that question, that very important question, where is your brother, Cain? Where is Abel? Where is your brother? And then that snarky response from Cain, cheeky. Am I my brother's keeper? More or less meaning, am I my brother's babysitter? Now, this passage does not give a response from God to that, not an answer in words. It leaves it hanging out there, I think a very effective literary instrument. No answer in words to this, just the result of the violence that Cain committed. Cain has to become an inhabitant of the land of Nod now. Now, Nod means in Hebrew a wanderer or a fugitive or an exile. So maybe the land of Nod was not so much an area, but a psychological state, being an outcast because of behavior, because of violent behavior. He was living east of Eden, away from the ideal place, that idyllic setting where harmony reigned, the place that God created for all life to flourish. Incidentally, the land of Nod also has some bearing on our specific area. And I would like the historians in our midst to check my information, but what I found, and I think it was on Wikipedia, that there's an area that was called Nod, just north of Woburn, the current Woburn, when this town was established in 1640 to 1642. The land of Nod probably, or according to Wikipedia, whoever put it there, that because it was such a forlorn piece of land, it was just not regarded as something or some place that you could really inhabit. We find in this narrative, the second narrative after Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden, a response to that arrogant smirk of Cain. A response saying, of course you are your brother's keeper. And if you do not acknowledge that and assume that responsibility, if you act with arrogance, with violence, you are rejected by the web of life. You are rejected by society. You are rejected by the web of life that sustains you. And that question, am I my brother's keeper, is also relevant, especially for us today. Because we so often respond with arrogance and with hubris, so full of ourselves, by having a violent existence in the world, violating the very earth, violently interacting with the web of life that sustains us and that we yet do not understand much about. And now I get to that sermon title, Running Out of Blue Paint. I encountered that phrase or that description of what was taking place in a village in Iceland, an artist village, where the painters was trying to capture the changing landscape of the ice sheet and the glaciers that they live on and in between. As glaciers melt and as the ice sheet melts, the color of it changes. And in this specific spot, it became more blue. It's very difficult to predict what the color will be. Some glaciers melt and they look like watermelon, and they smell like watermelon as well because of algae that is reactivated or that becomes active and returns to activity and active living again with a higher temperature. But these painters, because of the increasing blue with the melting glaciers, ran out of paint to capture their changing landscape. That to me was such a striking image, a shortage of blue paint because the glaciers were melting so fast that they couldn't keep up capturing those ice capes. Yes, we are the keepers of the earth and the web of life that sustain us, and I'm convinced that we experience that through the eons of evolution, the web of life has figured it out and developed a way to be to exist so that all life can flourish. And I'm convinced that the higher the consciousness of a being, the greater the responsibility to try to understand something of the complexity and to respond wisely and in a life-giving way. And therefore, for us, which probably has one of the higher forms of consciousness in the world, there is this increased responsibility. We are the keepers of this wonder, but we are also the keepers of each other in this community and in the church community. All of us, we are the keepers of each other. From the raving, woke progressive to the die-hard, fervent Trump supporter, and everything in between. That question, where is your brother? And have you assumed the responsibility, the loving care of your brother and collectively of this community and this society? Are we able to open ourselves to the Spirit of God, to walk in the ways of Jesus, so that our response is not the snarky and angry and aggressive one saying, I don't want to see you, I've got nothing to say to you except get out of my life and get out of my way. We are each other's keepers. So let us assume that responsibility and heed the voice that we find in this text when people were embarking, learning the ways of life in relationship with God. And let our response not be a snarky, smirky one. But as we affirm through gathering around the communion table, that we are gathered and we are together as God's people, but also as all life forms on the earth. We are together in God's love. Let us embrace that honored privilege. And let us make that our sacred duty, to be the keepers of the earth, the web of life, and of each other, especially, so that the capturing of those ice capes no longer results in a shortage of blue paint, but rather that there is a shortage of words and eventually sacred silence as we experience the wonder of life in restored relationships and in the astounding complexity and the beauty of life west of the land of Nod, the Eden of Shalom, of a just peace. Amen.